Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Scaling Pre-Sales in a Tight Labor Market with Freddy Mangum. My name is Tyler Pedersen. I'm a customer success team lead here at Consensus, and I will be your moderator for today's session. DEMOFEST is presented by Consensus. Consensus is intelligent demo automation software that helps scale pre-sales with interactive video demos. You can learn more at goconsensus.com. Consensus is proud to provide this event free for all attendees. However, we would like to invite you to donate to our company's humanitarian organizations if you'd like. You can learn more about this and donate via the link in the reception, or visit the expo hall and check out our DEMOFEST Gives Back booth. We encourage you to participate in today's session. On the right side of your console, you can see a few ways to engage throughout the session. The chat function will allow you to engage with us as well as other attendees during the presentation. Throughout the session, there may be a poll or two that pops up, and we encourage you to participate as your feedback is important to us. Our speaker, Freddy, will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the session, but we encourage you to ask the questions through the Q&A box at any time. If at any time you are having technical difficulties, toggle to your profile in the upper right corner and click Get Support. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Freddy Jose Mangum is the CEO of Hub. Freddy co-founded Hub to provide pre-sales professionals their own system of execution and source of record to perform daily work. Prior to Hub, Freddy was an advisor to various venture firms and former GTM executive at various high-growth companies. Freddy has been published in publications like the Harvard Business Review, and Forbes highlighted the importance of the pre-sales profession. You can connect with Freddy on LinkedIn. To learn more about Hub, feel free to visit www.hub.inc. All right, Freddy, without further ado, you can go ahead and get your presentation kicked off. I'll stop sharing my screen here and we'll get you going.
Great. Tyler, thank you so much for that introduction. And for all of you that are attending, thank you very much for being here. I really want to make this presentation very interactive, and hopefully the information here will be somewhat of a service to some of your needs, especially around scaling your pre-sales teams at your organization. And to kind of get started, I'm going to try to keep this very interactive. Feel free to interrupt as you see fit. Tyler, I may ask for your help on kind of, I guess you want questions posted on the chat session. Is that correct?
Yep, either way. And if you want, I can call them out as you see them. If you just prompt me, I can chime in when you need me.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just call them out. That'd be fantastic.
Perfect.
But let me go ahead and get started. So I guess a little bit of my background. I started as an SE in 1994. I've been in this space for quite some time. I've been an executive of a couple of companies, and I've had the luxury of living through a couple of bear markets. And I actually was I'm old enough to remember some of the crashes in the 80s, and obviously March of 2000 and 2008 and such. And it'd be kind of foolish not to acknowledge the current market climate we're in right now. The yield curve is indicating that we may be going into a recession. We're obviously experiencing a lot of things like inflation, not to mention a little conflict over in Europe that's causing all kinds of troubles around the world, supply chain issues. So, and the markets tend to be very bipolar, if you will, and can very easily overreact. And the reason I'm bringing this point up is not to be gloom and doom. It's just to basically provide context that this isn't the first time something like this has happened. And the thought process may surface around, what has this got to do with scaling pre-sales? Well, and here's the point I'd like to make on that is that, all those macroeconomic factors don't, at least from what I'm recognizing and what I'm seeing, don't impact the fact that we're still operating in a very tight labor market. Digital transformation is going to happen, regardless of how public markets behave. Cybersecurity solutions will be needed. Software solutions are going to be eating the world more and more, and that appetite for digital transformation is going to continue driving more and more demand for technical sales talent, specifically for pre-sales. And from my purview, I'm not seeing any slowdown in the demand for pre-sales talent. If anything, it just continues to be a situation where you got greater demand than you got supply. And I think we're just going to keep seeing more and more thousands of jobs that are going to be unfilled. We're probably going to have to tap into other departments like customer success and such to be able to fill the needs, and compensations are going to be going up, in part just because of the general principles of demand and supply, but in part because we got to keep pace with some of the inflation components. So it is what it is, right? And these are external factors that we all have to live with. And but as you all think about how to go about addressing this challenge around how do you really scale your pre-sales, I'd love to kind of challenge you a little bit to take a step back, right? And think of when you're looking to solve this problem, first and foremost, really understand from your C-suite and from your business, what does your go-to-market model look like, right? And what I mean by that is that it's not uncommon for certain organizations to say, hey, we've been very sales-led growth, right? We do the standard approach of technical discovery, presentations, demos, POC, POV management. And that certainly may still hold true for your type of product that you sell. But there's also various companies that are looking and say, okay, how do we actually initiate product-led growth motions, which is maybe like click, try, and buy. And when those situations kind of surface, that has a direct implication on how you should go about thinking about how to staff your pre-sales talent. Specifically, at what point do you get your pre-sales involved in a product-led growth versus a sales-led growth? Just because something may be product-led doesn't mean that the product sells itself. If anything, offering free trials are not free for the seller, and it may be worthwhile to do some element of qualification and also be able to apply a pre-sales resource or pre-sales person, a technical trusted advisor earlier in that free trial to provide a guided trial to really help map the value of the technology to the buyer. So these components obviously play a key component. The other ones too is that you have to look at, as the go-to-market model is being developed, whether again it's sales-led growth or product-led growth, how does that impact your mapping of either do you do dedicated resources of your pre-sales to sales, or do you some kind of shared pool model? And if it's shared, how do you actually assign the shared resources to the sales side of your house? Do you assign it on a round robin basis, or there other components that you want to be able to incorporate that make it a little bit more intelligent in your routing? So those are the things that I think you really want to be able to look at, and I would advise you to look at, saying, okay, what is our current go-to-market model today? And is our current go-to-market model going to evolve, right? And where is our focus going to be from our sales, from our growth motion? What percentage is enterprise, mid-market, and SMB? Because that's going to also determine how you think about staffing the bench of the players in your pre-sales organization. The other thing too that I would ask you to consider and your thought process of how to go about scaling your pre-sales is, again, really asking the question of your C-suite, what does success criteria look like for the business? So you understand how you can inject pre-sales to feed into that success criteria. For instance, what percentage of your business will be net new versus renewal? It's very common to have pre-sales be involved in really expansion or upsells or cross-sells, not just to renew the business, but also to increase the total enterprise sales value of an existing customer. And in some organizations, growth may be more important than margin. There are certain companies that are looking to just land and expand and grab as much market share as possible. But there's other companies that are saying, look, we're fairly massive, and we really want to be able to optimize margin and be much more seen as a value-centric company. So those things you want to be able to understand. So because it'll help you begin to fine-tune your lens of the kind of pre-sales talent that you need to have on the bench, and help you assess whether you have it now, and if not, do you need to get it? The third piece is, again, look at your current team, right? This is a very high-level example, if you will, of how do you go about assessing the kind of skills you have. And the skills, as you can see here as an example, you may have the people, your pre-sales people here on this axis, but what you really want to be able to do is map out kind of what are their sales skills, right? Do they have they been exposed to the right methodologies that help them become better sellers? And do they also have the right technical skill sets to be able to to really convey the value of the technology and the capabilities to map value to a technical buyer. And by doing some kind of matrix like this, it can help you identify, where you have certain gaps and where you have, redundancy in coverage, if you will. So in this case, Jill and Amy are both trained in Medic, which is fantastic. And you got other folks that are trained in other methodologies like Great Demo. But on a technical sales perspective, here you can see, for instance, that you only have Kathy that's got S3 expertise. Does it make sense to your, if Kathy gets is out with COVID for 2 weeks, which is very feasible these days, and you got a prospect that's got some S3 requirements, who else do you have on the bench that can cover that? So these are the things to really kind of contextualize and consider as you think about how do you start scaling your pre-sales team in a tight labor market. Because what you may encounter is that if you need to find more folks with S3 expertise, those people may very well be at a premium. But it'll be good to know, what's missing within your talent bench. The other
question come in, if you sorry.
Oh, perfect. So let me pause there for a second. Perfect. Yes, let's go ahead and bring up the question, please.
So it was about 2 slides ago, but I think it lends itself well to what you just said. It said, with the shared resources, what, in your opinion, is a healthy SE to sales or other resources ratio?
The answer is it depends. I think Consensus actually has done some surveys, and I don't know if you've gotten the most recent survey on this, but I believe Consensus discovered that the median ratio was 4-to-1 on a blended basis.
Correct.
But it's very common to where you can have a 1-to-1 ratio for a large enterprise deal that says that, for instance, maybe and a sales rep may be closing a $2-3 million deal, and they want to have a dedicated resource. And it's also common to have, if I don't know if I would advise it, but I have seen situations where you got a 15-to-1 ratio for some kind of SMB type of transaction, where the SE is supporting 15 sales reps that each may have a $700,000 quota. So it really depends, and I think that's one of the challenges that I hear oftentimes from SE leaders is that how do I go about determining the right ratios when I have all these other moving pieces taking place, and more importantly, how do I go about determining the right ratios based on based on data that can give me the leading indicators of when I need to staff up, because I don't want to know that, I don't want to know a month into it that we already should have had more SEs. I want to be able to look at kind of pipeline and sales activity so I can then begin that hiring process, because to hire talent, you need lead time to make that materialize. So those are the things that I think you want to be able to kind of think through as you're determining how to scale your pre-sales organization. And by the way, Tyler, feel free to interrupt me if anyone poses questions throughout these slides.
Perfect. We're good for now.
Okay, outstanding. So let me kind of go back to kind of covering here the team coverage. And now the fourth step that I would encourage folks to consider is when you look at your how to go about scaling your pre-sales, really think through of the value and the effort involved with scaling pre-sales. Just think through the scenario where you're going to go to the C-suite and say and tell them that you need more resources to adequately support the top line objectives, and you may even need more resources to support the stretch goal objectives. But one of the things that oftentimes is missing in pre-sales is really being able to kind of understand the actions that pre-sales people perform to support those sales activities, the outcomes they deliver, such as how much are they actually what's their attach rate to opportunities, and what does that do from an impact perspective. As an example, what's the win rate when a pre-sales person is attached to a deal versus not attached to a deal. And the last thing is really look at the unit economics, right? Ideally, all things kind of eventually get to the economics of, and this is actually a nice transition to this, is that they all eventually lead into the per unit economics, such as what is the cost per SE per hour and what is the revenue per SE per hour. And one of the things to think about as you're scaling pre-sales, it's not just about bringing bodies to the equation. It's not just about hiring people. I would really encourage you all to also think about what are the current things that are eating up the time of your folks such as travel. Does travel really need to take place for an SE? How much time are they spending entering data into systems like CRM? How much time is your leadership spending wrangling data to provide metrics and report to the rest of the team? And then by looking at things that you can do like automation, like more effective training to make them more effective to disqualify opportunities out. One of the things I often commonly hear is that there's on average 30% of the demos that SEs get involved in are poorly qualified. What kind of training and methodologies and systems can you put in place and tooling can you put in place to help your pre-sales team hold the sales counterpart accountable to ensure that they're effectively qualifying an opportunity? So it's, when scaling pre-sales, it's not just about hiring people. You also have to look at how do you get more productivity with what you have. What changes do you have to make to your process and your workflow, and what kind of tooling do you need to consider that can perhaps bring an element of automation?
We did have another question pop through, and it's around travel. So I think someone's trying to get some insight here. It says, are you seeing organizations return to travel, or is virtual still the predominant method?
The answer again is it depends. I'm starting to see an uptick on travel, but now I'm starting to see a moderation of travel. I think I just heard that New York may potentially begin to enforce masks again. I personally know of about 18 people that just got COVID in the last 2 weeks. So I think we're definitely moved to this, pandemic endemic stage. But when you have someone that it gets COVID and is sick for 2 weeks, and which obviously you don't want them to be sick to begin with, but when that's kind of impacting the productivity, I think the scrutiny on travel is that much more pronounced. So, but I think what I am seeing is that travel takes place when it's really justified to occur.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And that's actually a nice segue into the sixth piece that I would think about when you look at scaling your pre-sales and you're determining how to do that effectively, not just by staffing people, but also by introducing changes to your process and introducing tooling. By going back to the staffing piece, you want to be able to determine, with your current business where it is today and how it's evolving. Do you, I hate to say this, but do you need to kind of change some talent out? For a multitude of reasons, whether that's a cultural fit, whether they're embracing change, whether they have the right skill sets where they can still be seen as a trusted technical advisor. I do know of some companies, I don't know how I feel about this, but I do know some companies that tend to say, hey, look, we're going to get rid of some of our expensive SE resources and go for younger SE resources and just give them much more prescriptive approach to doing the work. Again, that's a very private equity type of mentality, but it seems to be working for them. But it's important that when you got to switch out talent, ask yourself, why are you switching it out? And when you got to bring on new talent, what type of talent do you need to bring on board and why? And then with your existing talent, what can you do to train them in those technical skill sets? What kind of investments do you have to make and advocate for? And what type of coaching do you need to do to give them those soft skills so they can be more effective in selling, versus just kind of doing things like showing up and throwing up, or just just going into the weeds and features without really reading the audience and understanding the key critical business issues and really mapping how to add value. To kind of recap, and again, I'd love to open it up for more questions, if you will, is that scaling pre-sales talent, in summary, is not just about hiring people or firing people. I would really encourage you to think like a CEO, to think like a general manager, and really ask your C-suite, your executive sponsors, if you will, what is our current go-to-market model, and what does success look like for us, to determine that, and then to assess kind of really what is the current team coverage, look like that of people we have on the bench. What are the business metrics we got to be able to quantify and qualify for the C-suite to demonstrate value? And how do we really optimize those per unit economics beyond just, that may include automating stuff that's mundane and really streamlining how people can work. And then use that as a criteria to really fine tune as you develop your job descriptions, why do you need the talent that you need, and really come up with a very clear action plan of what it is that you and the organization need to really do to optimize the people you have on the team as it is. So that is actually concludes my presentation, and I would love to open it up for more questions if I may.
We've got Stephen has a question here, and he says, where do you see most SE teams fail when scaling?
Great question, Stephen. I see them fail when they don't think about why do I need this talent. I see them fail when they're very quick just to essentially say we need talent and let's get recruiters on board and start hiring people. I'll draw a parallel that I think will resonate with this audience. It's like looking to buy a product without really identifying your success criteria. Because then if you don't identify effectively your success criteria, you can very easily encounter buyer's remorse. So really, the steps 1 through 5 that you see here is really, really getting clear on what is it that you need and why do you need it. And then the how, and jumping to the how, I would temper that anxiety, if you will. That's where I see them failing. The other component too is when, and Stephen, I think this will play perhaps near and dear to your heart, is that when you do decide to go out and hire and you have clarity as to what you're hiring and why you're hiring, you also have to be very clear on selling your company, your team, your culture, your leadership as to why someone should choose you over the alternative. Because in this market, it's still an employee's market. And differentiating your pre-sales environment is key.
Perfect. So we have 2 more questions actually, and probably more to come. But Jacob Smith is asking, we are struggling with lack of headcount for new hires. How do you recommend having the conversation with leadership to get more pre-sales team members?
By the way, I'm happy to take that a little bit more offline if it's merited. But again, what I would encourage you to do is first and foremost, have empathy for your audience, for your leadership team, right? Put yourself in the CEO shoes as an example. And Jacob, I don't know the kind of company you're in. I don't know if it's a startup or a large cap, but let me just I'll make some assumptions for more illustration purposes. But let's say you're in a startup that in January raised $100 million at a $5 billion valuation, right? And right now with the current market, companies like that are getting pressure by investors or private equity firms saying, winter is coming or winter is here. Batten down the hatches. Think about layoffs. Think about, that valuation is no longer justified, right? You got to do 5x of revenues to come close to that valuation. So what I would encourage you to do is always look at your audience and then try to empathize. Where is their head, right? When you ask for something, convey it or frame it in a way that matters to them. So in that situation, if the CEO is right now focusing on like, oh my gosh, I got to cut headcount, I got to still drive revenue, right? One way to frame it is that, hey, pre-sales could be a key to drive more revenue without adding more sales headcount. If you invest in pre-sales, you may not need to invest as much in sales. You may not need to invest as much in marketing, right? There's a lot of leverage in pre-sales because pre-sales optimizes the middle of the funnel. And historically, there hasn't been a lot of focus and emphasis on pre-sales tooling, pre-sales training. But when you just map the logic of like, if one pre-sales person can influence, 4 or 5 SEs, each of them having a quota of, 750K or so, why wouldn't you invest in pre-sales? Pre-sales has a broader area or influence on top line. Again, CFOs, and I've been in plenty of these meetings where either on a board or the executive staff meetings where you got the CFO, it's the CRO in one hand saying, you want me to drive sales, let me hire more salespeople. They say, let me hire more salespeople. They don't say, let me hire more pre-sales people. They say, let me hire more salespeople. And the CFO saying, well, why do you need to hire more salespeople? Make more revenue what you got, right? So if you go to the CFO and say, hey, look, here's a way we can potentially unleash more revenue, but, let's look at what's really going on in the middle of the funnel. I'll tell you a story of someone, of a customer of Hub. And by the way, I'm not trying to plug our solution, but I think it's material to this conversation. is that, uh, before using our solution, he didn't know the attach rate or his win rate. After he had our solution, he was able to say, holy moly, I just uncovered in 2 weeks that I have a 40% attach rate. And when we're attached to those deals, we have an 80% win rate. Him and his C-suite never knew that. And this is for a publicly traded company. So having those metrics now gave him the ability to sit down with a C-suite and say, okay, wait, we can try to do more marketing spend, more sales spend, but what can we do to really invest in pre-sales? Why are we not investing more in training? Why are we not getting more of these SEs attached to these deals to increase our win rate? Because what is our win rate when an SE is not attached? Is it 20%? If it's 20%, it's a no-brainer to attach more SEs to the deals earlier. I know of some SE leaders that went through that journey and they realize we got to get SEs attached to every deal. They have 100% attach rate. And because what they did is they went through that exercise and realized that they get higher win rates when an SE is involved. The other component too, Jacob, is, just think of how buyers are buying now, right? Buyers are self-educated. They want to be able to get to the net. They want to be able to understand, how do you help me solve my technical pain and add value? We're not living in a world where it's 2 bottles of wine and dinner and talk about your kids. We can get to that later, but first let me assess where you can add value. And that's in that type of sales motion, people want access to the SEs sooner. So those are just kind of, but again, you got to really understand your audience and try to understand what matters to them and convey your value of your pre-sales as to or frame it in a way that, it helps them be successful with the things that they care about. I know that was a long answer, but I wanted to provide that for comprehensive purposes.
No, I think it's super pertinent too. And it goes along with, Jacob was saying in the chat, that he said that they're running a 10-to-1 ratio, going back to the first question that we had. And it goes back to a few of the things I've heard in the sessions here at DemoFest specifically, is talking about what do you do then to make sure that you're qualifying the time for your SEs. And I think a lot of the times when you're making these decisions about where you're going to grow and where are you going to try and scale, it comes down to a lot of those data points, to the example you just shared of you don't really know what you don't know. So really trying to dig in and say, like, what is contributing to the key of success here? Is it having a body attached to it? Or is it a piece of automation that we can use to drive towards these winning deals and kind of make more with what we have? Because like you said, the investors are saying, oh, winter's coming and, let's keep the spend in check. But then they're also probably saying, and also continue growing at the same clip you've grown at. So it's always a fun balancing act, trying to figure out all of those data points.
Correct. And the great thing about being in pre-sales in these current market conditions, and again, look, the profession has been around for decades, but I've never seen this profession get this level of attention. I've never been familiar with any event that just caters to pre-sales. Like I think DemoFest is one of the first ones, right? And I think it's a great time to really, even with the macro environment and macro conditions, to really bring it to the C-suite. And it's like, this is potentially the time to look for greater efficiencies, because again, buyers buy differently and they want to talk to the tech people sooner. And two, this is kind of like a hidden gem. This is a way for you to get greater top line, greater productivity, greater contribution margin by just looking at this box, at this phase of the sales process, which I would call middle of the funnel, that has been grossly overlooked. Mm-hmm. But it's always there, and it's growing in relevance and it's growing in importance. And I suspect this is why even companies like Consensus are seeing a tremendous amount of uptick in your business, because people are saying, let's start looking at things that we can automate. But where the rubber meets the road is where you can begin to quantify and get the analytics on what people are doing, but do it in a way where you're not burdening the individual contributors with more data entry, mm-hmm. right? No one wants to spend 10 hours a week entering data to Salesforce. Love Salesforce, love the company, but that's not what's going to drive top line. So those are the things I think to think about as you think about really quantifying the value of your team, so then you can go out and scale your pre-sales effectively, and maybe with data make the argument as to why you should go from a 10-to-1 to a 5-to-1 ratio.
And that actually may segue nicely into our next question from AJ Waters. Speaking of, not burdening folks with more more tasks that they have to do. So AJ's asking, he says, what have you seen work for companies that are already running lean with the SE team, and how do they need to try to an onboard somehow?
AJ, good question. Again, I think a lot of it has to do. Well, let me paint this ideal picture. Imagine, just for discussion purposes, and actually, I think this feeds into a survey that Consensus did. I don't think it's unrealistic to imagine that an SE will work 50 hours a week. And let's just say, for argument's sake, it's 50. I could hear some folks saying 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, but let's just say it's 50. Imagine if you had at the tip of your fingerprint, access to where you could quantify how your SE team is spending time around those 50 hours. How much time they're doing data entry, demos, working with marketing, working with product, traveling, and you could, in your head, do the calculus and say, okay, if I pay this SE professional, I'll just make up a number, $150K a year, not even including benefits, which would be a higher cost of the company, but just say $150K a year, you could do your calculus of what that would be from a cost per hour perspective. And you could also say, okay, if I have that one person supporting, I'll just pick up a number, 5 SEs, each with $1 million quota. And again, just to keep the math simple, that one SE may cost me $150K, but they're supporting $5 million of top line quota retirement objective. And you could calculate the probability of what the revenue per hour could be for that SE. Now, but if you understand where they're spending their time and what's the cost, and if you can eliminate those things that are low value, right, such as entering data into Salesforce, such as, traveling 30% of the time, where they can maybe cut that down to 10% of the time, you can begin to reclaim that time back, that capacity, and then be able to now reapply that to more higher value activities that could drive more revenue, whether that's providing more coverage for the sales, whether it's providing, I'm not trying to do a plug for Consensus, but whether it's, creating content to build more top of the funnel and be able to, automate your qualification or disqualification process earlier in the stage of the funnel. But once you have that data, you can begin to make those data-driven decisions as to how to best utilize your talent. And additionally, as you start onboarding new talent, again, a lot of it has to do with, what I've seen to be very effective, and I've seen people show me this, is they'll essentially have playbooks. So when I bring on new talent, in some cases, they won't get SEs engaged for 6 months into an opportunity because they have to learn all this technology, right? Finding those subject matter experts, or certain industries, like construction, they say, like, look, we got to go find people that come with the domain expertise of that industry, so they can talk to credibility with technical buyers, right? And but they may know that craft, but they may not necessarily know the SE. So one of the things, or the SE craft, but you can teach them. And that's where I think having playbooks, having a process is very, that could be followed, not be overly rigid, can be flexible, can be adjusted. But I think those are the things that could be helpful. And you just look at the airline industry, no matter, you got pilots there that were former military people and been flying for 34 years, but they still go through a flight checklist. Why? Because it's always good to understand, like, that you're not missing certain steps. And if by not missing certain steps that will increase your success, in the case of a pilot, you don't crash the plane, you land to your destination safely. But the same thing applies in pre-sales. Like, if your success criteria is to win the deal, what are the things that you got to make sure you do to increase your probability of winning the deal? And that's where I think playbooks are really valuable. Hopefully that answers the question. If I'm not answering questions for anybody, please let me know. I'm okay being called out on that.
Well, I think you're doing a good job of answering them, and you are prompting more. So we've got some rolling in. So Stephen Schaefer again. So he said, you've talked about how SEs can create value to sales. Great example of identifying the win rate. What additional business cases would you look at to make a case for adding headcount?
Adding headcount on the SE, I suspect, is the question.
Correct. Yeah.
It's really, there's two, I don't mean to oversimplify this, but there's really two driving forces, right? How are you driving growth, and how are you improving my contribution margin? Not just my gross margin, but my contribution margin, right? And those are the reasons why you invest on people. And pre-sales is, again, that hidden gem, that hidden lever that can help drive growth. Just look at the example that I was using earlier, which is that, your one SE may have influence over, in the case that I think Jacob asked, is like if they're supporting 10 SEs or 10 sales reps, what's the quota retirement of those 10 sales reps? That SE has influence over 10 quota carrying reps, right? The other component of improving contribution margin is that with your SE person that's getting more expensive, how do you get more out of that? And there's actually a more indirect benefit. If your SE person was able to hold those 10 reps accountable, right? And imagine if they could go back to the 10 reps and say, 30% of the demos that you've asked me to do are unqualified. Fill out this playbook, fill out this criteria as to why I should engage. Imagine now if that SE is able to influence those 10 reps to get, their time back to more quickly disqualify those opportunities and apply their efforts to other opportunities that are more in line with the offering that you have to sell today. So, looking at pre-sales people is really just comes down to that simple thing of, well, how do you help me make more money, and how do you help me make me more profitable? And those are the two components at the end of the day, those decision factors roll up into.
Awesome. Yeah, you never think about that. If you've got 10 quote reps carrying $1 million each, then you've got an SE person carrying 10 million. So food for thought there for sure. I had not thought about it in those terms, but that's illuminating. David Marsh is coming through and he says, Freddy, what is a good way to capture reasons for wins and losses to easily identify problem areas as part of the pre-sales process?
David, how you doing? Good question. Let me just reread this question. What is a good way to capture reasons for wins and losses? A good way to do it is with as little effort as possible that can yield the greatest amount of insights. This is why I think you have tools like, Gong and all these other tools that try to do some type of transcription. I'm sure there's people here on this call that are very familiar with the good old pen and paper, and you sit down and scribble and take notes. And then we try to do it with cool iPads that can automatically put it into some kind of note tracking software. And then now we're doing things like, just recording conversations and doing analytics on the text. But at the end of the day, that's all very unstructured data. And I think what would be very helpful is to basically structure that data, because it's very common for folks to do, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 calls a day, right? And you could very easily, as you're context switching, you can lose context of what was really the critical business issue or the thing that really mattered to that prospect, unless you capture that given moment. But even then, you have to prepare for the next time you have that conversation with a prospect, you got to go through some kind of parsing through some type of data, some type of unstructured data source to figure out what matters. And again, this is where I'll go back to having playbooks, and I'll use my company as a perfect example. We did all of that, right? And we still do all of it as kind of a belt and suspenders approach. We take notes on paper, we have transcription software, we attach a lot of our information into our own product, our own platform. But what I found that could be the greatest amount of value is just saying, okay, we have playbooks that we define that could be 5, 6, 7, 10 questions that really matter. And at every opportunity, we just say, okay, let's just quickly take all that data, have it as a repository that we can reference, but let's just go answer these, N+1 questions for the corresponding stage in the pre-sales motion. And when we do that, now when we go back to that opportunity, we can just quickly reference it and say, okay, out of these N+1 questions, how many have been answered? And where does this opportunity really sit? And what has changed since we last spoke? Because it's a very quick way of being able to get to the questions that really matter, right? It's applying that old 80-20 rule. Really think of, focus on the 20% of the questions that will give you a good sense, give you about 80% view of the opportunity that matters to you. And you can have all this transcription and notes and all these other supporting documents as reference as you need to dig deeper into that opportunity.
And Jacob's also saying it's okay to pitch Hub to help answer that. So,
yeah, I'm thank you, Jacob. I'm really trying not to. Again, look, whether you do it in spreadsheets or whatever tool of choice that you have that you want to evaluate, or you're looking to invest in or build your own. We know people that have built their own. the fundamental issue in pre-sales, and you could even argue it's in sales, but I'm much more concerned with the pre-sales community. The fundamental issue with pre-sales is, we're drowning in information, but we're lacking wisdom. And the more we can basically and by the way, that's Tony Robbins quote, so it's not mine. But one of the things that we need to really do is quickly get me to be wise about the opportunity, so I know what I need to do, and whether I need to qualify or disqualify, whether I need to focus on a particular feature gap, or I need to really be able to hone in a particular key component that provides greater amount of value than my competition. That wisdom will help us be much more efficient in how we do our craft as pre-sales people.
Perfect. Well, any other questions or discussion topics from the group here? We'll give a second for, Frank, thank you. Frank's coming in. He goes, I have a metric-based approach to scaling pre-sales. I've created a spreadsheet that takes into consideration revenue, number of deals needed to get to that revenue, conversion rates, and the amount of time necessary for every deal. I'd love to share it. So it wasn't a question. I was reading it as I went out loud. But yeah, Frank, I think if you have a link to that or something, feel free to throw that in the chat. We can definitely have a look, or Freddy, I guess, connecting with you via LinkedIn and getting some thoughts there with Frank would probably be a good avenue as well.
Frank, absolutely. And Frank, just to expand on your point, and this is one of the things that I find really fascinating in many of our conversations with pre-sales leaders. There's a certain set of KPIs and metrics that definitely are consistent regardless of the type of widget that's sold, regardless of whether it's sales-led growth, product-led growth. Some of it obviously just comes down to fundamental components of what's my expense per hour, what's my revenue per hour, right? Those are universal, whether you're selling shoes or whether you're selling, compute instances on some kind of cloud solution. But the nuance really comes into what are some of the additional metrics you need to create that are very particular to your business. And I just recently had coffee with an SE leader, and I'll be writing about this with his permission. Or I should say, he already gave me his permission, but I'll be writing about this. And he's a gentleman who's been in Salesforce for over a decade, is a SE leader at a public traded company. And his insights were fascinating on the kind of the metrics that he created. And Frank, I don't know if this would apply to your situation, but he said, look, there's tons of metrics that I can apply. There's tons of things that I know we do. But he literally just took the approach of going into a CRO and saying, we're valuable. And the CRO said, yeah. He said, what are the things that you want to really measure? And he really, as he put it, he really kind of just had to really simplify the metrics for a CRO to where he was kind of dumbfounded about how simple it would be to convey value to the CRO by just focusing on these, 3 areas and 3 simple metrics that he cared about, such as, how much are we selling net new? How much are we selling existing? How much are the SEs, partnering with our sales reps to do account planning? And, how does that really constitute to also, converting and accelerating velocity in certain stages? But it was very, very particular to his business. But to me, it was just a phenomenal epiphany, because it's like, oh, you want to build KPIs and metrics? Go to your C-suite that who cares, and ask them, like, what do you what do you want? What do you really care about? And as an SEs, one of my old mentors who became a CEO at a company at one point, and earlier in my career as an SE, he coached me, and he said, look, when someone asks you for the time, don't tell them how to build a clock. Tell them the time. And sometimes as SEs, because we're thinking so much of our craft and our expertise, we go into how to build a clock. And when all we really need to do is just tell them the time. And that soundbite, I think, really applies to the notion of, focus on the KPIs and metrics that just tell your C-suite that the time, not how to build a clock. You can measure how to build a clock, but they may not need to know that.
That actually reminds me of a really funny callback. I was in a meeting one time, and finance was giving a report, and they were giving, 2 numbers. One was like the quote unquote real number, and the other one was like, well, if we had had a few breaks this way, it would have gone this way. And I remember the CEO at the time of the company I was with said, I feel like I'm wearing 2 clocks and no one can tell me, or 2 watches and no one can tell me which one is right. So it's just, that's always stuck with me. But yeah, that's a very interesting point, and you prompted that up in my head. I just got the flashback.
Yeah, Tyler, it's spot on, right? Because what companies want, and when I went through a process of filing an S1 and all that fun stuff, right, and work with a CFO who's very well known, one of the things that he taught me early on is that when you're a publicly traded company, investors don't like unpredictability. They don't want you to come under your number, and they don't want you to come over your number. You got to be right on point, because if you come over your number, in which you think that'll be a great thing, is that investors in public markets will infer that you don't really know how to run your business, right? You're not really valuing your business correctly. Maybe you're under investing in resources. If you're under, then obviously you don't know how to run your business. You're not investing enough, or you're not managing your business enough. So you really want to be on point. And I think when it comes to, creating metrics that really help you quantify your team, you want to be able to have confidence in your data. And if people really question, how you're getting the data, then you can say, in this area, I have a 100% confidence in this particular component, but in this component of the clock, there's a plus or minus 5% confidence level of my data, but directionally speaking, it's still good enough, right? So I think the how, you can reserve that to your own rights, and if you're questioned on that, that's when you can go into scenario A, scenario B. That'll help. That in those situations, that'll help you avoid the perception with your C-suite that you don't really have confidence in your data, and you're getting two different times when they just want another time.
Yep. I've always found too. So when you try and find these metrics that are not so simple, like deals in the funnel versus deals won, and you try and start thinking about, okay, well, what things can we measure to maybe show some of these more esoteric impacts? A lot of the times you start going down these rabbit holes, and you get into these really convoluted statistics or metrics that you find, almost like some baseball-esque stats that no one really understands, and you don't really know what the context for the number is. So I've always found of going back and trying to keep the main thing. So for example, when I came here to Consensus, I asked a customer, I said, what is the cost of your demo? What does it cost you to do a demo? And so just the raw dollar cost, when you were talking about an SE is making 150K, their loaded cost is probably, 150 times 0.8. And then they're prepping for the demo for 90 minutes. They're delivering the demo for 90 minutes. They're doing it with the salesperson, yada, yada. And then you can just very easily take the Consensus, not trying to pitch Consensus, but if you have an automation or a scaling tool, you can very easily say, well, we're paying, 50K annually for this tool, and we're delivering 1,000 demos for it. This is only costing us like $50 to deliver a demo with this. Whereas to fully pitch a customer with an SE that may or may not even be qualified, because we don't gate the SE's time at all, it's costing us 5x that. So I've always found that trying to cut and keep those statistics to like the simplest, most base level possible is typically helpful, because I think a lot of the times when you're trying to define and track something new that has an impact on the business, you don't really know where to start, and you can kind of start getting into these really weird convoluted metrics. Not sure if you had thoughts around that, or if I even left you space to talk, but hopefully that prompts some thought from you. I'd love to hear if you had any thoughts around that.
I do, and as you're thinking about that, and I think for the attendees here, I think the one point I want to make here is that when you're looking at scaling pre-sales talent, it's not just about it, or I should say, when you're looking to scale pre-sales, I deliberately left out the word talent or people here. There's other ways where you can scale, which is investing in people, process, or tooling, right? And I think a lot of it just has to do, and data is a great way of validating sometimes our observations that we perhaps are able to recognize from a gut feel perspective. But I think, using data to understand exactly where to optimize, where to hire, where to change processes, where to change tooling, I think that's what is going to be a real good compass for you all to determine where you can make those optimizations to scale your pre-sales. And hiring talent and hiring people may be a component of that, but you may uncover other ways to scale your pre-sales. But then that data will help you build confidence within your C-suite. And when you do that, then it's much easier to get the executive sponsorship and the budget and the support to invest accordingly in pre-sales. And I'll leave you with this last point. My observation on this market is basically that the C-suite, they still, no one. I'm not familiar with the C-suite saying, "Hey, build me a business case as to why we should buy Salesforce." Build me a business case as to why I should buy HubSpot, or a business case as to why I should buy Sales Health and Outreach. But I recall at one point in time that C-suite did that, right? They did say, build me a business case. Why should I invest in HubSpot for inbound marketing? Or, why should I build a business case for Salesloft or Outreach when I can just build this in Salesforce? And I think, it really falls upon the pre-sales community to just recognize that we're in an era now where pre-sales, again, is much more valuable than ever. Talent is very difficult to come by, but it's an opportunity for us to sell internally as to why a business should invest more in pre-sales and why they can get greater return than investing in other areas.
Yeah, and I think you prompted an interesting thought with me when you said, the way that you can scale things is either with people, process, or with tools. And I think, one of the things I was thinking is, it seems intuitive that you would want to start by scaling your process. And then if you can prove out by scaling the process to aid over here, we got X amount of return. And then you can kind of go to, so if we add more people, we can generate Y return, or if we add a tool, we can automate this and get, Z return. So it seems like scaling the process is often maybe the least barrier to entry right up front. And from there, you can make some inferences on what you can do to, hyperscale that, if you will, and add more efficiency to that area.
Correct. I mean, I'll wrap up this. I'll share this last story that I think plays also to that point. And talking to a pre-sales leader of a company that's doing, I think, about 400 million in top line, we talk about how do you scale pre-sales. He said, "Look, I got my metrics, and what I realized is that for a portion of our product that serves more commercial transactions, I don't need SEs making 250K a year to serve that market. What I realize is that when I can, introduce some element of tooling that can automate certain components of our sales motion, and I can inject, I can have things like playbooks that can really give them a very prescriptive set of steps to follow. I can actually hire people at 110K, cost basis, and they can utilize more of the senior folks if they need it. But that's a way to scale. Because to me, to hire, to try to go off my competitors' SEs at 250K, it's just not scalable. And I realized that by the injection of tooling and making some process tweaks, I can actually hire lower cost folks and serve that aspect of the market. So I thought it was a very interesting way for him to look at that. But again, some of the aspects of data were able to help him give him that insights, or rather validate his gut feels on the business.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for expanding. So I guess we can do last call for any questions. And then if not, we can go ahead and wrap up with some of the housekeeping things. We're coming to the end of DEMOFEST. So we've got some exciting announcements towards the end here. But Freddy, thank you so much. And again, last call for any questions before we wrap up.
I guess any questions, feel free to reach out to me personally over LinkedIn, or I'll put my email address here as well. But happy to share some stories and some things we're seeing in the market. But with that, I want to thank Tyler for letting me be part of DEMOFEST. I want to thank the audience for giving me some of your busy time. I hope you got some value from this conversation. And if you want to continue the discussions, feel free to reach out.
Perfect. Well, Freddy, thank you so much. Absolutely incredible session. I know I got a lot out of it. I was looking forward to this topic and was excited I was able to moderate it, quite frankly, because I think this is something that I do my work in a day-to-day environment, something that a lot of my customers are running into head first. And so, definitely some things I'm going to absolutely steal from you. I will give you full credit, but I will definitely be using this in the future. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So we want to remind everyone just a couple housekeeping things before we wrap up and let you go to your next session. I want to remind everyone that each session that you attend today actually gets you an entry into our raffle to win some awesome prizes. So make sure to attend as many sessions as you can. We're winding down here. So our final session today, May 19th at 2 p.m. Mountain, 4 Eastern, is where we're going to be raffling off all the prizes. So that is one you definitely do not want to miss. We're also excited to announce that DEMOFEST is going to be hitting the road. So make sure to attend our last session again, May 19th today, to find out what cities we are going to be in this year. And we're also going to encourage you to stop by our expo hall to visit our premier partners of DEMOFEST. Reminder, there's no money transfer involved in this event. So all of our partners are here have gone above and beyond to contribute in making sure this event is a success for all of you. So thank you for joining us for the session today. Again, Freddy, thank you for your valuable insight and knowledge. Loved it. I can't wait to use this in my future calls that I have tomorrow. Actually, there's one I've got coming up just right around this topic, and I'm definitely going to be using some stuff from this. I put up on the screen some of the upcoming sessions that you can join. You can toggle over to the sessions tab on the left, and we'll see you guys very soon in and around DEMOFEST. Thank you very much.